2:14 a.m., March 11, 2026. Port Newark Container Terminal. Berth 18, Newark, New Jersey. The MV Celestine Maris, a Marshall Islands flagged feeder vessel, sat low at the dock under sodium arc lights, her hull riding nearly 4 feet deeper in the water than her declared cargo should have allowed. 14 40-foot containers had been staged on the pier overnight, manifested for a West Africa sailing scheduled to depart before dawn. The manifest read, "Used agricultural machinery, not otherwise specified, declared gross weight 18,400 kilograms. Destination, Cotonou, Republic of Benin." A CBP VASIS Gen 2 tomographic X-ray unit had been queued to scan the load before crane transfer. The scan image came back in under 9 minutes. Inside those 14 containers, chalked in foam-lined rows with axles blocked and wing mirrors folded flat, were Range Rover Sport HSEs, Mercedes-Benz GLE 454 Matics, and Ford F-150 Raptor Rs. Approximately 70 stolen luxury vehicles packed hull to hull, every VIN plate re-stamped to clone a clean title from a donor car still listed as active in California, Texas, or Florida registries. 38 minutes. That is how long the full takedown would last. From the first federal radio call to the last zip tie, across 3 states and 9 locations simultaneously. Before that morning arrived, Operation Slipway had already run 11 months, 15 surveillance teams, 4 undercover identities, and a Title III wiretap generating 14,200 hours of recorded call traffic. By the time the last federal transport van cleared its location, the case file would carry 1,900 traced stolen vehicles and 61 federal indictments. The headline figure in forfeiture orders, $214 million. Every dollar of it traced back to a single weight figure that a 34-year-old manifest reviewer noticed at 9 minutes past 2 in the morning. This is the story of Operation Slipway, the largest vehicle export interdiction in the recorded history of the Port of New York and New Jersey. It began 11 months before that dawn, with a junior CBP clerk who had never flagged a Form 5106 discrepancy in 3 years on the job. Until the night he did. This is how it happened. Daniel Okafor's workstation occupied a glass-paneled booth at the east end of the Berth 18 inspection bay, a room lit in the particular fluorescent yellow that everyone who works nights in federal port facilities eventually stops noticing. 34 years old, 3 years at CBP Newark on the manifest review desk, mostly overnight shifts, processing import and export cargo documentation for the terminal's container traffic. He had reviewed hundreds of agricultural equipment entries. He knew the numbers well enough. It was 2:09 a.m. when the manifest bundle for the MV Celestine Maris landed in his processing queue. The queue ran 14 line items. 13 were entirely routine: hardware fittings, plastic resins, crated textile components. Okafor processed them in sequence. The 14th read, "Used agricultural machinery, NOS, 14 container load units, described as plowing equipment, declared gross weight 18,400 kilograms. Origin, Newark Consolidated Freight Depot. Destination manifest, Cotonou, Republic of Benin." Okafor pulled up the commodities standard weight table on the CBP internal Atlas database. A midweight tractor plow assembly ran approximately 1,200 to 1,400 kilograms. 14 containers at standard density for that commodity category came to, at most, 18,000 kilograms under those parameters. That was consistent. The declared weight was consistent. Nothing in the Atlas commodity check flagged. But Okafor did not route the containers to clearance. He requested a secondary gross weight validation against the terminal's own weighbridge, a physical pressure scale embedded in the pier surface that every container must cross before crane loading. The weighbridge ticket came back 3 minutes later. 31,200 kilograms, not 18,400. A discrepancy of 12,800 kilograms, 12.8 metric tons of something that was not on the manifest. Okafor stared at that number for approximately 4 seconds. He told the federal grand jury later that he felt no dramatic intuition in that moment, only the procedural reflex that 3 years of training had built. He opened a Form 5106 anomaly entry in Atlas, checked the field marked weight divergence, gross manifest versus terminal weighbridge, recommend physical inspection, attached the weighbridge printout as Exhibit A, and called his supervisor. The supervisor on duty was a 17-year CBP veteran running the 22 o'clock to 06 Ugrad shift. She reviewed the flag in under 2 minutes, confirmed the Weighbridge ticket against the manifest figure, and at 2:14 a.m., authorized a VASIS Gen 2 full penetration scan of all 14 containers. The VASIS operator began the first pass at 2:22 a.m. By 2:31 a.m., 9 minutes into the first scan sequence, the screen was showing a density profile pattern that no plow assembly produces in a 40-foot box. Rows of horizontal cylinders at ground level, axles, wheel wells, brake drum housings, vertical roof lines at precisely the height of a mid-size sport utility vehicle. The density gradient matched steel and tempered glass, not cast iron and soil equipment. The supervisor looked at the screen, looked at the manifest, and called the HSI duty officer for Newark. Let me tell you what the arithmetic looked like, because it is the foundation of the entire case. Agricultural plowing equipment, the commodity declared on that manifest, runs a standard weight range of 1,200 to 1,400 kilograms per assembly for the type of unit that 14 containers could reasonably hold. 14 containers, fully packed at maximum unit weight, come to 19,600 kilograms at the high end. The manifest declared 18,400, within range, within tolerance, exactly where a careful fraudster would put the number. The actual gross weight, 31,200 kilograms. The difference, 12,800 kilograms. 12,800 kilograms is the combined curb weight of 9 Ford F-150 Raptor rupees. Somebody built a manifest that understated the load by the equivalent of 9 pickup trucks and counted on a 2 a.m. night shift to wave it through without checking the scale. It had worked before. For 11 months, it had worked on every prior load. The manifest hit Atlas. The commodity code cleared, the containers went to the crane, the ship sailed. Nobody checked the Weighbridge. Daniel Okafor checked the Weighbridge. HSI Special Agent in Charge Monica Reyes, 44, had been running the HSI Newark Counter-Proliferation and Export Enforcement Unit for 6 years. 18 years with Homeland Security investigations, the last 4 specifically focused on port-side cargo fraud, commercial trade diversion, and illicit export enforcement across the Port of New York and New Jersey complex. She picked up the duty phone at 2:47 a.m. She was at the terminal by 3:15. Reyes reviewed the VASIS imagery. She reviewed the Weighbridge printout. She made 3 calls before she walked back to the scan bay. The first was to the FBI Newark Field Office duty agent, Special Agent Thomas Drummond, 38, 12 years with the Bureau, currently assigned to the Organized Crime and Racketeering Squad at the Newark Division. The second was to the New Jersey State Police Auto Theft Task Force Night Supervisor, whose unit had been tracking a pattern of targeted high-value vehicle thefts across the state's commercial corridors for the better part of a year. The third was to the CBP Port Director's Office to authorize physical unstuffing of all 14 containers at berth 18. The containers were opened at 4:11 a.m. What came out were 68 vehicles. Range Rover Sport HSE, model years 2024 and 2025, Mercedes-Benz GLE 450 4MATIC, Ford F-150 Raptor R. Every VIN plate on every vehicle had been replaced. The dashboard plate, the door pillar plate, and the engine block stamp. All consistent with one another, and all corresponding to a real, clean title number registered on a different car, still active in law enforcement databases, somewhere else in the country. The physical execution was precise. The numbers were internally consistent. The clones were convincing. Whoever had built this pipeline had been careful, methodical, and had been doing it for a long time. Within 48 hours, the MV Celestine Maris was anchored under a CBP detainer in the outer harbor. Its cargo was inventoried, documented, and transferred to federal custody. A joint HSI-FBI preliminary inquiry had its first 68 vehicle identification numbers to run against the National Insurance Crime Bureau's VIN-check database and the NCH stolen vehicle file. All 68 came back stolen. The scale of what lay behind those 68 vehicles was not yet visible. But a decision was made immediately at a joint meeting between Reyes, Drummond, the New Chas Task Force Supervisor, and a duty officer from the District of New Jersey. Early on the morning of March 13th, do not charge the load. Do not disclose the intercept to the shipper of record or the freight forwarder. Work back up the chain and find the full network. Who was stealing? Who was processing the VINs? Who was containerizing? who was financing the operation, and who was receiving the cargo on the overseas end. That decision was not straightforward, and anyone who has studied how port interdiction cases develop will understand why. HSI and FBI were holding 68 stolen vehicles, with an estimated retail value of $6.8 million. They had a shipper of record, Coastal Meridian Logistics LLC, a freight forwarding company incorporated in Newark, New Jersey, with a legitimate FMCSA freight forwarder certificate, an EIN, and a registered address on Ferry Street. They had a consignee in Cotonou. They had a carrier. On paper, every link in that chain had a license. If agents moved on Coastal Meridian that week, they would hit a shell company with a forwarding license and a paper address. The real operational network, wherever its nodes were, would close, relocate, and be unreachable within 30 days. Dozens of individuals would walk away without federal charges. The vehicles already overseas would stay there. The alternative was to run the case sealed, Title III, full surveillance, build the network map, while the pipeline kept operating. Every week of surveillance was another week of vehicle thefts. Every week of thefts was another week of owners in New Jersey and Georgia and Texas reporting their Range Rovers and their Raptors missing from driveways and parking structures, and in many cases never recovering them. We'll say what most people in federal law enforcement circles will not say publicly. That calculus has a cost that gets paid by people who have nothing to do with the investigation. The decision to run the long game rather than the quick arrest is defensible from a prosecutorial standpoint. It produced 61 indictments and a $214 million forfeiture case instead of a single freight forwarder shell and 3 misdemeanor charges. But it is not cost-free, and the people who paid that cost while Operation Slipway built its case were the theft victims. The U.S. Attorney's Office called back by 3 p.m. on March 13th. Work Title III. Build the full picture. Sealed case. Operation Slipway had a formal case file number by March 14, 2026. Lead, HSI Newark Counter-Proliferation and Export Enforcement. Supporting FBI Newark Field Office Organized Crime and Racketeering, CBP Port of Newark, New Jersey State Police Auto Theft Task Force. The first step was identifying the person at the center of the structure. Adrian Mensah Cole was 47 years old at the time of his arrest. He held a master's degree in international trade finance from a university in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and had spent 12 years working as a licensed freight broker in the Port of Newark commercial ecosystem, before becoming, by the account of federal investigators and the cooperating witnesses who would later testify, the primary financial architect of the vehicle export enterprise, the task force designated internally as the Vehicle Export Revenue Network, or VERN. In the freight community, Mensah Cole was known for being methodical and quiet. He paid invoices on time. He responded to emails the same day. The logistics brokers and terminal agents who worked with his Coastal Meridian LLC on legitimate loads described him, when federal investigators later interviewed them, as professional, private, and unremarkable. He drove a 7-year-old Volvo. He owned a townhouse in Kearney, New Jersey, registered in a relative's name. He paid cash for his dry cleaning. He was not the kind of person whose name you remembered. Underneath that surface, the federal case file described a significantly different profile. Starting around early 2021, Mensah Cole had begun building relationships with 2 separate acquisition networks of tow truck operators and organized auto theft crews across New Jersey, Georgia, and Texas. Not opportunistic theft, targeted acquisition to order. A buyer at a receiving network in Cotonou, or Tama, in Ghana, or the Lagos Transshipment Corridor, would specify a vehicle make, model year, color, and preferred trim level. That order would move through an encrypted messaging application on a server outside U.S. jurisdiction, down through Mensah Cole's acquisition coordinators to the tow yard contacts, and within 10 to 21 days, depending on availability, a vehicle matching those specifications would be taken, transported to one of 9 storage depots spread across New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and then delivered to what the case file called the service stage. The service stage was VIN surgery, systematic replacement of every vehicle identification number with a cloned stamp sourced from a salvage title record on a vehicle of the same make, model year, and color. The salvage donor was already clean in law enforcement databases, written off by an insurer, properly titled, its number available for $200 to $500 through dark web title broker services. The surgically re-stamped vehicle now carried that number on the dash, on the door pillar, and on the engine block. All 3 plates matched. All 3 corresponded to a clean title, unless an examiner ran the engine block number against the NICBADE database and simultaneously cross-checked it against the physical Weighbridge gross at the container terminal. The discrepancy between the re-stamped vehicle and the actual stolen record was functionally invisible in any normal cargo review. From 2021 through early 2026, the investigation estimated that Verne had processed approximately 1,900 vehicles through this pipeline, from targeted acquisition through VIN replacement to containerization to export. At an average vehicle market value of approximately $55,000 per unit in the U.S., the cost value of those vehicles totaled roughly $104.5 million. By the time those vehicles reached buyers in the West African secondary market, where a 2024 Range Rover Sport commands a substantial premium over U.S. retail in cash purchase transactions, the aggregate receiving end asset value that federal prosecutors would eventually quantify in forfeiture filings was $214 million. The money, proceeds from sales through the Cotonou and Tema and Lagos networks, moved back through a layering structure that HSI financial analysts and FBI's Financial Crimes Unit spent 4 months reconstructing from bank records subpoenaed under Title 31 and from transaction records obtained through mutual legal assistance requests to Cyprus and the Netherlands. The structure ran 3 primary channels. Blue Meridian Capital LLC, the name a deliberate echo of Coastal Meridian Logistics, was a New Jersey incorporated financial holding company. Crownfield Settlement Services SA was incorporated in Cyprus. Ariston Trade Partners Limited was registered in the British Virgin Islands. The transaction sequence was always the same. Receiving end payment in local West African currency equivalent, converted to dollar-denominated wire, routed first to Ariston in BVI, layered through Crownfield in Cyprus, then entered into Blue Meridian Capital in New Jersey as consulting receivables or trade facilitation fees, and distributed outward as payroll and operating expenses to the tow yard acquisition crews, the VIN surgery technicians, the terminal logistics coordinators, and Mensa Cole himself. 97 subordinate accounts had been identified across 7 jurisdictions by the time the indictments were filed. The Cyprus shell alone, Crownfield Settlement Services, had been operationally active for 11 years and had processed, by the financial forensics team's count, over $400 million in total transaction volume across its full history. Only a fraction of that volume was directly tied to Verne. What the rest of it represented, and who else was using that structure, became a question that extended well beyond the arrest date. I spent a significant amount of time going through the financial exhibits in this case file, and one detail kept pulling my attention back. 3 of the 97 subordinate accounts flagged by the HSI Financial Analysis Team had been active since 2014, 7 years before Verne formally began operations. Whatever those accounts were used for prior to 2021 is a separate inquiry, one that the Cyprus Financial Intelligence Unit is apparently still conducting. The Title III wiretap was authorized by the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey on March 28, 2026, 17 days after the Birth 18 interception. It covered 12 phone numbers and 4 encrypted messaging application accounts, associated with Mensa Cole and his 4 primary coordinators. The court authorized a 30-day intercept window, subsequently extended twice on renewed affidavit showings of probable cause. Within the first 3 weeks of intercept operation, the wire had captured 2,200 separate communications, of which federal analysts flagged 840 as directly relevant to vehicle acquisition, transport coordination, VIN surgery scheduling, or container booking. The language on those calls was disciplined. Vehicles were called units, VIN surgery was service, container loading windows were closings, tow operations were pickups. The receiving broker in Cotonou was referred to on all intercepted communications only as the client. Mensa Cole himself almost never named a specific vehicle or location on a call. He used day of week and number sequences that the task force spent 6 weeks decoding against the surveillance footage of storage depot activity. The HSI passive surveillance operation ran out of a leased commercial unit on the perimeter road of the terminal complex, presented as a ground transportation scheduling office. From that position, fixed cameras and periodic mobile surveillance units documented 67 vehicle movements in or out of 3 of the 9 identified storage depots between April and September 2026. The task force ran VIN checks on 14 vehicles that surveillance was able to photograph clearly enough to capture plate or window sticker numbers. 11 of the 14 came back stolen. There was an obstacle, and it was a significant one. For the first 3 months of the Title III operation, the task force could hear the network operating, but could not identify where Mensa Cole was physically accessing. What intercepts confirmed was a real-time logistics ledger. References to the log, the board, and the count appeared repeatedly across wire traffic, always in the context of Mensa Cole or a coordinator checking status before and after a vehicle movement. The ledger was clearly central to how Vern coordinated across its 9 storage nodes. But without the hardware, they could not read it. Without reading it, they could not identify all the buyer accounts or the full list of acquisition orders pending. By mid-June, the task force had located all 9 storage facilities, identified Mensa Cole's 4 primary coordinators by name, and cataloged at least 31 subordinate operators. They had also, through a combination of wire analysis and financial subpoena results, identified where the ledger hardware was almost certainly located, the townhouse in Kearney. Getting to the hardware meant a search warrant. Executing the search warrant meant tipping Mensa Cole that law enforcement was on him, which meant the network would close before simultaneous arrests across all 9 nodes were possible. The task force's solution was to build the arrest plan around a loading date. Mensa Cole's export cycle, established through wire analysis and terminal surveillance, ran on approximately a 6-week rhythm tied to the sailing schedules of 3 feeder vessels he rotated through berth 18 and adjacent berths at the terminal. The next projected loading window was late February 2026. Task force planning began building toward that window 6 weeks out, with a projected 4-week pre-positioning phase for SWAT team staging, warrant preparation, and interagency coordination. And then the window moved. A February intercept caught a call between Mensa Cole and his primary terminal logistics contact, a night foreman on the berth 18 crew who had been receiving cash payments for advance notice of CBP inspection schedules, discussing an accelerated loading window for March 11th. Not late February, March 11th, 9 days out. A 6-week preparation cycle had to be compressed into 9 days. The raid plan, which had been built around a flexible lead time with weeks for pre-positioning, had to be essentially rebuilt. What's most surprising about Operation Slipway, looking at the case file from front to back, is not that the weight discrepancy was caught. It's that the federal task force redesigned an 11-month operation in 9 days and executed it without a single coordination failure across 3 states and 14 simultaneous tactical teams. The 9-day compression created its own problem, and it was a serious one. The Omega team, the team assigned specifically to the Kearney townhouse and the laptop, needed a separately sworn search warrant affidavit for residential entry, distinct from the criminal complaint warrants for the arrest targets at the storage facilities. The residential affidavit had to be written, reviewed, approved by the U.S. Attorney, and signed by a federal magistrate in the 9 days between the intercept call and the March 20th arrest date. Ausa Christine Nakamura, 39, 8 years in the Complex Crimes Unit, and the lead HSI special agent on the Omega team, worked the affidavit over 72 hours across 4 drafts before a magistrate signed it on March 19th, less than 12 hours before execution. With the warrant in hand, Omega team had one additional problem. If Mensa Cole had time to shut down the laptop before federal entry, the encrypted partition holding the ledger would close, requiring a passphrase to reopen. Without Mensa Cole's cooperation, which no one anticipated, the ledger might be unrecoverable. FBI Cyber Division provided a hardware interrupt solution, a specialized device that, if applied at the correct moment in the laptop's boot sequence while the encrypted partition was actively mounted, could freeze the operating state in a partially authenticated condition. Whether that device would work depended entirely on whether Mensa Cole had the laptop open and logged in at the moment of entry. Teams assembled in the early hours of March 20th, 2026. 14 HSI and FBI tactical elements. 3 New Jersey State Police Bearcat G2 armored vehicles. 2 Pennsylvania State Police Bearcat units. A CBP Cessna citation surveillance aircraft in holding patterns over the terminal at 8,000 feet. 61 sealed criminal complaints. 18 USC 553, 18 USC 2314, and RICO conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. 1962, filed with the court that afternoon, SEALs programmed to lift with the first radio call. Teams ran Alpha through November, assigned across the terminal and the 9 storage locations by geography and operational priority. Alpha and Bravo were terminal side, covering berth 18 and the inspection bay. Charlie through Golf hit the northern New Jersey storage nodes. Hotel through Kilo covered the Pennsylvania facilities. Lima through November covered Delaware and the secondary Wilmington staging yard. Omega held on the Kearney townhouse. At 4:19 a.m. on March 20, 2026, Monica Reyes keyed the tactical radio net. All units, Slipway, execute. At the terminal, Alpha Team, 8 HSI agents and 2 CBP officers in plate carriers, moved through the inspection bay entrance on federal credentials rather than a breaching charge. The berth 18 night foreman, himself a named defendant in the RICO count for accepting cash payments in exchange for CBP inspection schedule information, was at his workstation when Alpha Team entered. He looked up. He did not move. He was in federal custody by 4:21 a.m. Bravo Team simultaneously closed the vessel berth. 2 CBP Zodiac Milpro FC-470 rigid hull inflatable patrol boats came alongside the MV Celestine Maris from the stern at 4:22 a.m. A joint CBP Coast Guard boarding team of 6 officers was on deck and at the wheelhouse by 4:24 a.m. The vessel's master was a non-defendant, detained pending identification. The ship's first officer presented the ship's papers. The Attorney General has signed a federal detainer on this vessel, the boarding team lead told him. Stand down the crew. In Linden, New Jersey, Charlie Team hit a storage yard on Route 1 and 9 at 4:20 a.m. A Bearcat G2 blocked the exit gate while a 6-agent HSI entry element moved through the personnel entrance. The night watchman at the facility, a named defendant, attempted to exit through the rear fire door. A containment agent positioned outside the perimeter fence took him in the parking lot behind the building. Time to custody, 6 minutes. Delta Team hit a tow yard operation in Carteret, New Jersey, simultaneously. The primary target at that location, the Vern Network's senior VIN surgery coordinator, a 39-year-old automotive technician the task force had surveilled for 7 months, was found in the attached office trailer, awake, apparently reviewing something on a laptop. He did not physically resist. He was in zip cuffs by 4:23 a.m. You have no jurisdiction over licensed commercial automotive operations, he said, according to the arrest report. Sir, you are under federal arrest under 18 U.S.C. 553 and RICO conspiracy, the agent on point said. Please stand and place your hands behind your back. He stood. He placed his hands behind his back. Echo and Foxtrot teams hit 2 storage facilities on the Elizabeth Hillside corridor within 3 miles of the terminal. Echo Team encountered a locked roll-up bay door on the primary warehouse and used a hydraulic ram to breach in 4 seconds. Inside, 11 stolen vehicles in various stages of VIN surgery, tools arranged across a 4-bay workbench, and 2 individuals who did not move from where they were standing. Golf Team, hitting the Secaucus facility at the northernmost end of the New Jersey cluster, found the building empty. The defendant assigned to that location was not present. A statewide bolo went out at 4:27 a.m. At 6:14 a.m., 47 minutes after sunrise, New Jersey State Police located the individual at a fuel station on the New Jersey Turnpike, southbound, approximately 18 miles from the facility. In Pennsylvania, Hotel and India teams covered the largest single node in the Vern Network, a 3-bay storage complex in Chester, Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia, approximately 18,000 square feet of floor space. 22 vehicles in various stages of processing were found inside. The Pennsylvania hub manager, a 41-year-old logistics contractor who had managed the Pennsylvania side of VIN surgery operations since 2022, was located in a rear office with 2 associates. All 3 offered no resistance. Hotel team lead radioed custody confirmation at 4:34 a.m. In Delaware, Lima and Mike teams cleared both locations without incident. 3 defendants, 3 arrests, no resistance. At the Kearney townhouse, Omega team made entry at 4:20 a.m. using a battering ram on the front door, following 3 seconds of knock and announce. Mensa Cole was found in the second-floor home office, seated at the desk. The laptop was open. It was running. Something had alerted him. A sound outside, an early notification of some kind. the specific intuition that comes to people who have run an operation at risk for years. He appeared to have been attempting to log into the encrypted partition when Omega Team cleared the doorway. Whether he was trying to delete the ledger or simply to check whether anything had been flagged, investigators could not determine. The Omega Team's FBI forensic specialist applied the hardware interrupt device to the laptop's active USB port while the screen was still live and the encryption software was mid-mount. The device froze the operating state in a partially authenticated condition. Then the agent pulled power in a controlled sequence, preserving that suspended state on the drive's encryption layer. Mensah-Cole was in handcuffs by 4:28 a.m. Adrian Mensah-Cole, the Omega Team lead, said, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to transport stolen motor vehicles in interstate and foreign commerce, conspiracy to transport stolen property in interstate and foreign commerce, and RICO, conspiracy under Title 18 of the United States Code. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mensah-Cole said nothing. At 4:57 a.m., 37 minutes after Slipway, execute, HSI Special Agent in Charge Monica Reyes received custody confirmation from all active teams. 60 of 61 named defendants were in federal custody. The 61st, taken on the turnpike at dawn, would be processed through the same system by 8 a.m. The physical inventory of everything recovered took 3 weeks of federal evidence processing work across all 9 storage locations, the berth 18 containers, and the vessel hold. The count came to 312 stolen vehicles in various stages of processing or staging for export, in addition to the 68 vehicles recovered from the MV Celestine Maris containers on March 11th. Combined with the vehicles traced through NICSB VIN check to prior Vern export shipments over the previous 4 years, the total VINs attributed to the enterprise reached 1,900. The evidence inventory also included 47 complete VIN stamp kits, 14 hydraulic door pillar presses used for engine block number replacement, 11 encrypted handsets consistent with the model used by Vern coordinators, 4 external hard drives, and the laptop from the Kearney townhouse. The forensic evidence was transferred to the FBI evidence facility for processing. FBI Cyber Division completed its access to the laptop's encrypted partition 11 days after the arrest, working at the Quantico evidence facility using the suspended authentication state created by the hardware interrupt. The passphrase had not been required. The partition opened. What was inside was a 1900 vehicle operational ledger, organized by acquisition date, storage node, VIN surgery completion status, container assignment, and destination buyer account. Every unit in the system tracked from initial acquisition to export clearance. It was not the record of a freight forwarder. It was the supply chain management system for a criminal enterprise. The ledger also contained the buyer accounts, 16 standing accounts across Cotonou, Tema, and Lagos receiving networks, account identifiers, transaction histories, quantity agreements, and, critically, future order specifications, some dated past March 20, 2026, orders for vehicles that Mensah-Cole had intended to acquire, process, and ship in the weeks and months following the arrest. The U.S. Department of Justice announced the operation at a press conference in Newark on March 21, 2026. U.S. Attorney Margaret Callaway and Monica Reyes stood behind a display of vehicle title documents, re-stamped VIN plates in evidence bags, and containerization paperwork. The aggregate figures: $214 million in asset value, subject to forfeiture, 61 defendants facing federal charges, 14 states identified in the theft origin geography of recovered vehicles. 2 of those victims, whose vehicles had been among the first 68 recovered from the Celestine Maris containers, were present in the back of the press conference room. They were not identified. One of the task force agents, off camera, quietly handed one of them their key fob. The defense team assembled for Adrian Mensah-Cole's federal proceedings was led by a 2-attorney partnership specializing in international trade law and RICO defense respectively. Their argument was systematic, that Coastal Meridian Logistics was a licensed freight forwarder conducting legitimate commercial operations, that the VIN replacement activity was performed by subcontractors whose relationship to Mensah-Cole was entirely arm's length and commercial, that the transaction flows through Cyprus, and BVI shells were consistent with standard international trade receivables under OXT transfer pricing guidelines, and that the prosecution's RICO theory improperly aggregated independent commercial actors into a constructed criminal enterprise that did not meet the statutory definition under 18 U.S.C. 1962. The prosecution's response was the ledger. Across 14 days of trial testimony, the government called 4 forensic accountants who reconstructed the Blue Meridian Crownfield-Ariston layering structure, transaction by transaction. 2 NICB database analysts walked the jury through the process of matching re-stamped VIN numbers on recovered vehicles to original stolen vehicle reports. A former HSI counter-proliferation and export enforcement supervisor testified as an expert witness on vehicle export fraud structures, explaining in clinical detail how the VIN surgery process worked and why it was designed specifically to defeat standard cargo manifest review. And 2 cooperating witnesses from within the network, both of whom had accepted plea agreements, testified to Mensacole's direct operational role in directing acquisitions, approving VIN replacement sequences, and authorizing container bookings against the ledger. One of those cooperating witnesses, a former VIN surgery coordinator who had worked for the Verne network for 3 years, described Mensacole's operational style in terms that appear repeatedly in the cooperating witness notes: precise, calm, and almost never present at a physical storage location. He communicated through the encrypted handsets. He reviewed the ledger, he approved the bookings, and he kept his own hands clean of everything. The ledger made that irrelevant. Put yourself in the jury's position for a moment. On one side, 3 expert witnesses on international trade compliance, and an argument that the defendant was a licensed freight broker who relied on subcontractors. On the other, a 1900 vehicle operational database on a personally controlled, password-protected, hardware-encrypted laptop in a locked safe in his home office. A database that tracked every stolen vehicle by name, node, surgery status, and destination buyer, with his credentials as the sole administrative access. The jury deliberated for 2 days. All 8 full trial defendants were convicted on all counts. Plea agreements had already resolved 53 of the 61 defendants before trial. In the federal courtroom of Senior U.S. District Judge Raymond Pastor, sentencing was handed down across 2 proceedings in May and June 2026. Mensacole received 22 years federal imprisonment on the combined RICO, 18 U.S.C. 553 and 18 U.S.C. 2314 counts, to be served consecutively. His primary terminal logistics coordinator received 14 years. The Pennsylvania hub manager received 12 years. 3 VIN surgery coordinators received sentences ranging from 7 to 9 years. 2 tow yard operators who cooperated with the government received reduced sentences of 4 and 5 years respectively under Rule 35. Total forfeiture orders covered the 312 vehicles in federal custody, the value of the 68 Celestine Maris vehicles, and the identifiable contents of the Blue Meridian capital accounts. The cash forfeiture figure ordered by Judge Pastore, $31.4 million. The remaining $182.6 million in asset value was subject to civil forfeiture proceedings against foreign-held accounts, the Cyprus and BVI structures, and the Cotonou, Tema, and Lagos receiving network proceeds. The 16 buyer accounts from the encrypted ledger were transmitted to Interpol's Financial Crimes Division within 48 hours of decryption. Interpol's General Secretariat in Lyon issued notices to member countries covering the West African receiving networks in the week following sentencing. 3 individuals named in those notices were identified as currently operating within the jurisdictions of member states. 2 remained at large as of the date this file was assembled. 1 had traveled to a jurisdiction outside Interpol's enforcement reach. The Crownfield Settlement Services account history, the full 11-year operational record, $400 million in total transaction volume, was transmitted to the Republic of Cyprus Financial Intelligence Unit under the existing Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. That analysis is ongoing. The names it may produce are not yet public. There's a line in this indictment that reads almost like fiction, buried in Exhibit 47 of the Financial Forensics Package. The Cyprus shell had received wire transfers from 31 separate source jurisdictions across its 11-year operational life. 31 countries. Verne was one customer. What the others were moving through the same 3-node layering structure is a question that does not appear in this indictment. It appears in the next one. Today, those names are inside Interpol case files. They are not yet in handcuffs. Do you think automated Weighbridge cross-checks against manifest declarations should be mandatory for every outbound container at every U.S. port? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every one. One manifest line. One Weighbridge ticket. 12,800 kilograms that didn't exist on paper. That gap, smaller than the curb weight of 10 pickup trucks, unspooled 1,900 stolen vehicles, $214 million in recovered asset value, and 61 federal indictments across 3 states. Every container that cleared Berth 18 in the 11 months before March 11, 2026, also had a Weighbridge number. Nobody checked. If you want to keep walking through federal case files the way the agents themselves walked through them, subscribe to FBI Documents, and tell us in the comments which operation you want us to open next. Case closed.